Mr. Mandel, why don't you give us an indication of your background before we delve into the subject of our interview, which is the latest iteration of the Mohammed Al-Dura affair.
Well, Jerry, I'm a historian. My area is the modern Middle East. In fact, my PhD concerned the UN decision to partition Palestine, so that's obviously one of my major sidelines. I'm a historian, a diplomatic historian, and mainly American and Western foreign policy towards the Middle East. Going a bit more widely than that, and of course I've worked in think tanks here in America, as I do currently.
Recently, for what seems to be the third or fourth time, there's been an investigation over the Mohammed Al-Dura filming that was done, I believe, on September 30, 2000, and became an iconic piece of propaganda for the Palestinian and some say the Jihadist cause. Why are we still debating the facts in this matter at this point?
Well, debating the facts of the matter because, as Winston Churchill put it very rightly, a lie gets halfway around the world before truth gets a chance to put its pants on. That's certainly what happened here. The image of the crouching Mohammed Al-Dura with his father next to him during a fusillade between the Israelis and Palestinians back in September 2000 is something that everybody knows, everyone has seen. If there's one image in the last 10, 20 years from the Middle East, or let's say there are 5 images from that period, it is certainly one of them. And it's not one that easily forgotten. And it was very, very simple. Everyone assumed, the Israelis even conceded at the outset that they didn't think they had, but they weren't prepared to deny it, and it was feasible without an investigation looking into the evidence that perhaps they had in fact killed him, obviously unwittingly, but they took the responsibility. An investigation already back then, the Orr Commission, found out very, very quickly that it was in fact most unlikely that Israeli fire was responsible for, as it seemed at the time, the death of Mohammed Al-Dura. Now we know, due to the campaign of people like Philippe Carcenti in France, who, a series of court cases with France 2 Television, which was responsible for the report, managed to bring out the details that there was extra footage. The extra footage hadn't been seen. We'd never seen in the footage of Mohammed Al-Dura being actually killed. We'd seen footage of a terrified boy during a period of gunfire, and later his prostate boy, presumably dead. In fact, we now know that we see his limbs moving after the point at which it was said that he had been killed. And we've seen, and there's in fact there is no footage of him in fact actually being shot and obviously killed. That was the first very concrete piece of evidence that things were not as they had seemed. There were others, of course. I mentioned the ballistics aspect, the Israelis were not in a position to be firing at him in view of the direction the bullets appear to be coming in the France 2 footage. There's also no likelihood the Israelis having actually been in a position to see the boy at the time either. But these details get lost, as I say. The lie gets around the world, the truth gets forgotten. Now, a commission looking at all the evidence, spending many months sifting it using ballistic experts, physicists, and so on, has come to the conclusion that, in fact, there's no evidence Mohammed Al-Dura was even killed in the incident in question, let alone by the Israelis.
There have been some heroes on the investigative side in this regard. One of them is Esther Shapiro, or Shapiro, I should say, from Germany. A colleague of mine, Nidra Pauler, and Professor Richard Landis of Boston University. In fact, Landis apparently had seen some of the footage earlier and marked about some of the missing pieces in it at that time. What perhaps is disturbing is that this latest report that was commissioned, I believe, last September of 2012, and came out, I think, on May 19th, has subsequently been the subject of still yet another legal action that's been brought against the State of Israel by none other than Mr. Ondelin.
Well, look, Charles Ondelin is someone who, of course, is going to be judged on protecting his reputation. But it bears saying that at the very least, there was a dereliction of duty on his part involved, because firstly, we know, at his own admission, that he wasn't on the scene at the time. The voiceover is his, but he wasn't on the scene at the time. That is voiceover added subsequently to the footage. The footage was shot by a Palestinian cameraman. And it was Ondelen who simply accepted his testimony that this was footage of a Palestinian child being killed by Israeli gunfire. He didn't believe he had any reason to doubt it, although, of course, you look at the footage, he may have asked the question, where was the actual footage of a boy being killed? And there were, of course, inconsistencies in the presentation. It was later said that there was such footage, but it hadn't been shown in the interest of public taste and so on. The footage doesn't appear to exist. So, at the very least, there's a dereliction of journalistic standards involved, even if one doesn't go any further than that.
Why is the press, and I'm referring to the leftist press in Israel, so skeptical about this latest official study on the part of the Netanyahu government? And I'm referring to the comments in the last few days coming out of the Haaretz.
Yeah, there's been skepticism. You have to bear in mind this is all happening in a context. The party that one might have expected to be most concerned and most jealous of its reputation, the Israeli military, has been reluctant to pursue this issue all along. As I mentioned earlier on in the interview, the Israelis preemptively accepted responsibility for the killing, as it appeared to be at the time, of Mohammed Al-Dura. The reason for that is very, very simple. There was, in case people don't remember, there was a tidal wave of opprobrium and criticism of Israel at the time. That how could the Israelis have recklessly killed this child who was obviously defenseless and obviously posing no risk to anyone? That was the story. That's what it looked like, and that's what was believed readily before any evidence was out or taken in the matter. Israel thought it was going to cut its losses and simply admit a mistake had been made, and hoping to move on from there. And since then, the attitude has been very similar throughout. That is, don't raise the matter again. Let's not go into this. Let's not bring back a terrible memory. In other words, the assumption is this is such bad news for Israel that nothing good can come of raising it. That it's going to be a net loss, no matter what the revelation is. I take a different view, and that is that, on the contrary, the Al-Dura affair cost Israel so greatly with its reputation, caused Israel such tremendous amount of harm, that even at this remove, bringing up the matter, returning to it, if there's actual evidence of, as there now appears to be, that it was in fact a hoax all along, Mohammed Al-Dura didn't even die in the incident in question, then Israel can only stands to gain, and of course to restore its reputation. This is what, of course, any innocent person wrongly accused would seek to do. It says very much something about the success of the psychological warfare waged by the Palestinians, with the connivance of the international media, that the Israelis are not even prepared or very, very unwilling to do that. And the report has been publicized. It's actually received very little attention overseas. One of the reasons we wrote the piece was precisely to bring it to attention.
How does Israel rebut this iconic footage, even the stills that are still floating around on the internet? This is despite, for example, several documentaries, probably the most powerful of which was done in 2009 by Esther Shapiro, that really gives the full story of what occurred there that day, and also within the context of the eruption of the Al-Aqsa Mosque Intifada. That was not only violent, but it took several hundred lives, both Israeli and Palestinian.
Yeah, well, it was certainly used as a pretext for a wave of violence, because we know, once again, subsequently we know that a great deal of that was also engineered, although there was, of course, genuine outrage generated by this canard that the Israelis had killed the child. But you point to something important. There was a Shapiro documentary. There was also a German documentary some years earlier, which also cast doubt on some of the main ingredients in the story. But at the height of the violence, when there was no Israeli government pushing the issue, when no one had seen the rest of the footage, or was even necessarily aware that there was footage in question to be seen, it could make very little headway. Here, the Israelis are in a different position. The Israeli government has a bully pulpit. It can call a press conference. It can be complete with forensic evidence, with slideshows, with footage being shown, with ballistics experts and other specialists on hand to answer specific questions. It could be led by a senior member of the government. it's not something that can actually be ignored if the Israelis choose to do it. And this would seem to me to be the time when Israel's own officially commissioned inquiry into the matter, the most thorough that there has been till now, has actually reported in the sense that we've just mentioned.
Isn't there another date coming up for a decision in the suit in France, I think in late June?
There is. I've lost track of the French court cases, but you're entirely correct. The court battles in France haven't ended, and we'll have to wait and see what occurs there.
Well, this is unfortunately classic blood libel. In many ways.
But Jerry, it's more than just a classic. Admittedly, this is just one case out in isolation, but that's the point. It's one case amidst thousands. There is an entire Palestinian agitprop industry that is involved. This is obviously the most famous, the most damaging case where Israel is concerned. But there is, of course, the phenomenon of Pallywood, as it's called, about the Palestinians playing and reenacting, or shall we say, enacting false scenarios of Palestinians being slain, about Israeli brutality. We've seen and uncovered on occasion, but it doesn't get much coverage, footage of Palestinian wounded on stretchers who suddenly leap out of stretchers when they think the cameras have ceased to roll. We've seen ambulances ferrying terrorists rather than wounded civilians from one place to another. There's been what the Israelis very cleverly, euphemistically call workplace accidents, Palestinian bomb makers inadvertently exploding their own projectiles before they applied on a suicide belt. Dead Palestinians all over the place. They say it's an Israeli strike, and the press is prepared to believe them, and so on. There's a very consistent pattern here: demonization and legitimization of Israel, which of course underscores why we don't have peace. Because if you're going to make peace with someone, you don't go around telling the world that this is a demonic enemy who we all owe it our duty to destroy. That's not what you do when you're trying to make peace. It indicates that they're trying to eliminate the state of Israel. Otherwise, you wouldn't be having what is really a Palestinian adaptation of a third world psychological warfare, an integrated political and military campaign designed over time to lead to a victory over a militarily stronger enemy.
Isn't it remarkable that there's biometric evidence that the child who was seen dead in Shifa Hospital does not bear a resemblance to the child in this film?
That was one of the interesting pieces of evidence that emerged. I've looked at the photographs myself. To be honest, I can't really tell, but I can see why there's room for doubt. Of course, looking at a photograph as we can do isn't going to answer the question. But there's clearly a lot of unanswered questions. Or put it this way, putting the Palestinian Authority on the spot could help answer some questions. I think the Israelis are actually in a unique position if they wish to take advantage of this. They are supposed to be dealing with the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority is supposed to be negotiating. They refused over 4 years to negotiate with the Israelis. The Israelis should refuse in turn to negotiate until there's in the public a Palestinian admission. Probably, if in fact the Israelis have any evidence of direct Palestinian Authority involvement in the Al-Dura hoax, direct as opposed to simply referred benefit, then they should demand no less. That's what you do. When you've been defamed, you demand a public apology and admission. And I think that the worth of that is that it changes the psychological dynamics of the conflict. And Israel needs to be doing that on a very broad and comprehensive scale. Israel, in fact, I like to argue, needs its own unified political and military doctrine, one that serves over time to obtain for the Israelis a victory. At the moment, they have a defense doctrine. That is by nature reactive. It's about putting out political and military brush fires. And that's essentially what the Israelis do. It's sometimes better, on some occasions, sometimes worse. But that doesn't win a war. The offensive needs to be taken to the enemy at a psychological level, which is the level at which they've been waging on the Israelis. The elements of that can be discussed, but that is really what the Israelis must be doing.
I'm reminded of a happenstance meeting that we had with a gentleman in Jerusalem who was a Dutch Jew by origin, who said that the one problem about Israelis was they didn't know how to market the truth, which seems to be their Achilles heel, regardless of whether this most recent commission report has all, quote, the facts involved. And it would be interesting if there was something equivalent to what the Palestinians and their friends in the Third World do, which is to put together, quote, an independent commission that would review all of the forensic and physical evidence that has been accumulated over time and say definitively, in our opinion, this is not true and it is a hoax. But even more so,
it certainly could be submitted, couldn't it, to an international panel of experts whose impartiality one could trust. That is certainly something Israel could do. But I mean, you point to the problem very, very well. I think it's a failing of the Israelis that they feel that if they have the truth on their side, the truth will simply will out. I mean, you see that it's a heedless attitude. You got that early on in Oslo. When I very well remember Shimon Peres saying, we don't need special Hasbara efforts, because if we have a good policy, meaning one in which we're actually achieving peace of Palestinians, we're not going to need Hasbara. We don't have to explain anything to anyone, because the truth will be evident. The fact of the matter is, when you're dealing with a side that, in fact, hasn't concluded peace, and is still waging a political, psychological, as well as a military campaign, you do need to alter the psychological dynamic in your favor. It's not enough to insist that you have the truth. That's why Israel spends a great deal of time putting out fact sheets. Its diplomats, some of the good ones especially, are very, very adept at answering questions and showing why some of the Palestinians have said wrong. But it's after the event. It doesn't alter anything. This is simply, that's playing defense. Israel needs something, this is important, but Israel needs something additional.
Of course, the definitive evidence might be either the forensic remains of a child, Mohammed Al-Dura, who may have been killed by spurious Palestinian fire during that day, or in fact may still be alive, now that he's probably something in the vicinity of his mid-20s. I just wonder if that's
it would be interesting to come across a fully grown Mohammed Al-Dura. That's perhaps the missing piece of the puzzle. We don't know exactly or precisely what happened to him after the events in question on the 1st of September 2000. What happened to him, whether he's alive or dead, and if he's dead, how he met it. All we do know is that it doesn't appear that he met his death at the time everyone thinks he did.
Correct.
That's scandal enough.
Daniel Mandel, I want to thank you for this rather comprehensive discussion. I congratulate you on your piece that appeared both in the Allgemeiner and on the Iconoclast of the New English Review.
Well, thank you again for running it, and we'll have, I think, occasion yet to see what transpires.
Fair enough.
Thank you for having me on.
Cheers.